I thought I was signing up for a night shift, not a ghost hunt. Tonight, I'm pulling a shift at a Louisiana hospital with a dark past. And the patient rules aren't about medicine, they're about surviving the supernatural. Get ready, because what I'm about to reveal about never turning your back on an empty bed will make you rethink every hospital visit. The Crescent Heights Medical Center loomed against the midnight sky like a monument to suffering. Spanish moss hung from the surrounding live oaks like funeral shrouds, swaying in the thick Louisiana air despite there being no wind. My headlights cut through the darkness as I pulled up to the rusted gate, illuminating a faded "No Trespassing" sign riddled with buckshot holes. Beyond it, the hospital's east wing stood dark and hollow, its windows like empty eye sockets staring into nothing. They say some places just feel wrong. This one felt like the wrong place to breathe. I sat in my idling car for a full 5 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to convince myself that $3,000 for a single night shift was worth it. The recruitment email had been vague, almost cryptic. Unique overnight position available for qualified medical personnel. Premium compensation. Discretion required. When I'd called the number, the woman on the other end, Patricia, had been equally mysterious. "We have trouble keeping staff," she'd admitted in a voice that sounded like smoke and gravel. "The work is straightforward, but the environment is challenging." "Are you easily frightened, Jordan?" I'd laughed at the time. I'd worked emergency rooms in New Orleans during Mardi Gras. I'd handled overdoses, stabbings, and every variety of human catastrophe the city could throw at me. How challenging could one night at a mostly abandoned hospital be? My first impression as I stepped out of the car and felt the humid air wrap around me like a wet blanket? Get out. My second, as I looked at my bank account balance on my phone? How much are they paying again? The gate wasn't actually locked, despite appearances. It groaned open when I pushed it, the sound echoing across the empty parking lot like a warning. Gravel crunched under my shoes as I approached the main entrance. The hospital had been built in 1923. I'd learned from a quick internet search. It had operated continuously until 1987, when some kind of incident had led to its sudden closure. The details were frustratingly sparse online, buried under layers of bureaucratic language and sealed records. It had reopened partially 3 years ago under new management, though only a handful of rooms in the West Wing remained operational for what Patricia called specialized long-term care. Even before I signed in, the air felt thick with something else. Something that made the hair on my arm stand up despite the oppressive heat. The front entrance was modern enough, a jarring renovation that clashed with the building's Gothic revival architecture. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sickly blue-white glow. A small desk sat unmanned in the lobby, a sign-in sheet and a silver bell waiting beside an old-fashioned visitor log. I rang the bell, and its chime seemed to be swallowed by the building itself, disappearing into the corridors beyond without echo. "You must be Jordan." I spun around. A woman in her 60s stood behind me, though I hadn't heard her approach. She wore navy blue scrubs and had steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her eyes were the pale blue of winter sky, and they studied me with an intensity that made me want to look away. "Patricia?" I asked, though I already knew. "Head nurse Patricia Landry. Welcome to Crescent Heights. She didn't extend her hand. You're right on time. That's good. Punctuality matters here, especially after dark. The way she emphasized those last two words sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the aggressive air conditioning. She moved to the desk with practiced efficiency, pulling out a time card and a thin, worn pamphlet. The folder was old, the kind of brown cardstock that hadn't been used in decades, with coffee stains and what might have been water damage along the edges. Or maybe not water. The title, printed in faded typewriter font, read Occupational Safety and Spectral Guidelines for Evening Personnel. Spectral. Not special. Spectral. This isn't your typical orientation, Patricia said, watching my face as I processed that single word. We don't have time for typical. You'll be on duty from midnight until 6 a.m. You'll be the only medical staff on the active floor, though you won't be alone in the building. There are 3 patients currently in residence, all in private rooms. You won't interact with them directly unless there's an emergency. Your primary responsibilities are monitoring, documentation, and most importantly, compliance with the protocols outlined in this manual. Spectral guidelines? I finally managed to ask. Patricia's expression didn't change. Mr. Rivera, this facility has a unique history. The previous administration experienced certain incidents that remain unexplained by conventional means. Rather than ignore these incidents or pretend they don't occur, current management has chosen to document them and establish protocols for staff safety. You'll find we're very serious about these protocols. Previous employees who disregarded them are no longer with us. Meaning they quit? Meaning they're no longer with us, she repeated, and the finality in her tone made it clear she wouldn't elaborate. The pay is generous because the work demands absolute adherence to unusual requirements. If you're not prepared for that, you can leave now with $100 for your time. If you stay, you're committing to following every rule in that manual without exception or question. Which will it be? I should have taken the $100. I should have walked back through that groaning gate and never looked back. Instead, I thought about my student loans, about the eviction notice I'd received last week, about how $3,000 would buy me breathing room I desperately needed. I'll stay, I heard myself say. Patricia nodded as if she'd expected nothing less. Sign here, here, and initial here. This waives the hospital of liability for psychological distress, acknowledges that you've been properly warned about the facility's unusual nature, and confirms you'll maintain absolute confidentiality about anything you experience tonight. The pen felt heavy in my hand as I signed away what felt like more than just liability. Good. Now, let's cover the essentials. Patricia opened the pamphlet to the first page, which was dense with numbered rules in that same typewriter font. Some had been crossed out and rewritten in different handwriting, as if the protocols had evolved through trial and error. Terrible error. Rule 1. Patricia began, her finger tapping the page. Never turn your back on empty beds, gurneys, or examination tables. Not even for a moment. I blinked. I'm sorry, what? You heard correctly. Empty beds. If you enter a room and the bed is unoccupied, you must keep it in your line of sight at all times until you leave the room. If you need to work on something, position yourself so you can see the bed peripherally. If you must retrieve something from a cabinet or counter, do it quickly and check the bed immediately after. Why? The question came out more sharply than I intended. Patricia's pale eyes locked onto mine. Because of Vincent Theroux. He was a patient here in 1952, a veteran who'd come back from Korea with wounds both visible and invisible. He died in room 217 after he was left alone for approximately 6 minutes. When the nurse returned, she found him in the bed with his eyes open, except he'd been confirmed dead 20 minutes earlier in another room entirely. The nurse turned her back to record his vitals on the chart. When she looked back, Vincent was sitting upright. She ran. She quit nursing altogether and moved to Texas. That was 70 years ago, but Vincent hasn't left. He appears in empty beds when they're ignored, when backs are turned. Sometimes he's just there, sitting up, watching. Other times he's standing beside the bed when you turn around, close enough to touch. The way she recited this, matter of fact and clinical, was somehow worse than if she tried to scare me. This wasn't a ghost story told around a campfire. This was institutional knowledge passed down through shift changes and orientations. Has anyone actually seen him? I asked, my throat dry. Every staff member who's worked here more than 2 nights. Most see him within the first 4 hours. Patricia turned the page. Rule 2. Room 304 must have its light on at all times. The switch is located outside the room. Under no circumstances should you enter that room, and under no circumstances should you turn off that light. And if it goes out on its own, then you follow the emergency protocol detailed on page 7, which involves calling the number listed, staying in the nurse's station, and not investigating any sounds you might hear until your relief arrives. She looked up at me. They said if the light goes out, it comes out. I've been here 11 years. I've seen that light go out 3 times. I don't know what's in that room, Jordan, but I know it should stay in the dark. The light keeps it contained. My mouth had gone completely dry. What's in room 304? Something that should have died in 1983, but didn't. Something that still screams on certain nights. Something that leaves handprints on the inside of the door, even though the room's been empty for decades. Patricia closed the pamphlet and handed it to me. There are 17 rules total. Some are simple. Don't use the old elevator after 2 a.m. Don't respond if you hear someone crying in the supply closet on the 2nd floor. Always knock before entering the morgue, even though it's been sealed since 1987. Others are more complex. You'll need to read through all of them before you start your rounds." She led me down a corridor, our footsteps echoing off ancient linoleum that had probably been pristine white once but had aged to the color of old teeth. The walls were institutional green, paint peeling in spots to reveal older colors beneath. Pink, blue, yellow, as if the hospital had tried repeatedly to brighten itself up and failed each time. Framed photographs lined one wall, black and white images of nurses from different eras, their faces solemn and exhausted. In several photos, there was a blur in the background, always in the same spot, always roughly human-shaped. We passed a waiting area with chairs that looked like they hadn't been sat in for years, a water fountain with a "Do Not Use" sign taped over it, and several doors marked with room numbers that had been crossed out and replaced with red X's. The deeper we went, the older everything became, as if we were traveling backward through time. "This is the nurses' station," Patricia announced, stopping at a circular desk surrounded by filing cabinets and ancient computer monitors. "You'll spend most of your time here. The patient rooms you're responsible for are 106, 108, and 112, all on this floor. Their charts are here. You're to check on each of them every hour on the hour. Take vitals, ensure they're comfortable, document everything. They're all heavily sedated and shouldn't wake, but if one does, press the red button here immediately. What happens if I press it? I come back. Quickly." She pointed to a logbook. "Document everything. Every sound you can't explain, every light that flickers, every time you feel like you're being watched. We track patterns here. It helps." "Helps with what?" Patricia didn't answer. Instead, she pulled out a ring of keys and handed them to me. Green key for the medication cabinet. Blue for the supply closet on this floor only. Red key is for emergencies, but you'll know if you need it. Don't use it unless absolutely necessary. And this," she produced a small, old-fashioned silver bell, the kind you'd ring for service at a hotel. "Keep this with you. If things get too overwhelming, ring it 3 times and wait. Someone will come. Someone. She checked her watch, an ancient thing that looked like it wound manually. "It's 12:17. I'm leaving. Your shift ends at 6 a.m. The front door will lock behind me and won't open again until your relief arrives. There's coffee in the break room, but don't drink from any mug that isn't white. Don't use the microwave after 3 a.m. And Jordan, keep that pamphlet with you. Follow those rules exactly as written. They were learned through experience, and experience here is measured in screams." With that cheerful advice, Patricia walked back down the corridor. I heard the front door open and close, heard the lock engage with a heavy click that echoed through the empty building. Then there was silence. Complete, absolute silence. that felt less like the absence of sound and more like the presence of something holding its breath. I stood at the nurse's station, the pamphlet clutched in my sweating hands, and started to read. By Rule 5, never make eye contact with the figure in the stairwell window. My hands were shaking. By Rule 11, if you hear your name whispered from inside a closed room, do not answer and move to a different floor immediately. I was seriously reconsidering this entire decision. But I was here now. The door was locked, and I had 6 hours until sunrise. I looked down the corridor where the fluorescent lights created pools of brightness separated by shadows that seemed too dark, too thick. Somewhere in the building, something creaked. Water dripped in a distant pipe, and underneath it all, so faint I might have imagined it, I heard what sounded like someone humming a lullaby. My shift at Crescent Heights Medical Center had begun. The first thing I did was read through all 17 rules 3 times, committing each one to memory like my life depended on it. Because standing in that empty nurse's station, surrounded by the oppressive silence of Crescent Heights Medical Center, I had the distinct impression that it might. Some rules seemed almost reasonable in a twisted way. Rule 3. Always announce yourself before entering a patient's room, even if you can see it's empty. Rule 6. If the temperature drops suddenly, leave the area immediately and document the location and time. These felt like precautions someone had developed after uncomfortable experiences, the kind of superstitious protocols that develop in any old building with a dark history. But others made my skin crawl. Rule 13. If you see a child's handprint appear on any surface, do not touch it and call the emergency number immediately. The child is not friendly. Rule 15. Between 2:45 a.m. and 3:15 a.m., remain in the nurse's station with all lights on. Do not respond to any requests for help during this window, regardless of how urgent they sound. That last one had a note scrawled in pencil beneath it. The Devil's Hour. They're most active. Diana learned this the hard way. P.L. Who was Diana? What had she learned? The questions multiplied with every rule I read, but the pamphlet offered no explanations, only dire warnings written in increasingly desperate handwriting, as if each edition had been made after some fresh horror. I checked my watch, 12:34 a.m. My first rounds weren't due until 1 o'clock. That gave me 26 minutes to familiarize myself with the layout, check supplies, and try to calm my racing heart. I grabbed a clipboard, hooked the silver bell to my belt loop where it hung like some kind of medieval talisman, and started exploring my domain for the night. The West Wing, where I'd be working, was relatively modern compared to the decrepit areas I glimpsed on the way in. The floor had been refinished, the walls repainted in a neutral beige that tried desperately to be calming. But there were signs of the building's age everywhere. Original crown molding, ancient radiators that clanked and hissed, doors with transoms above them that dated back to the 1920s. Most unsettling were the floor tiles near the nurse's station. Someone had tried to replace a section, but the new tiles didn't quite match, and the pattern created a distinct outline roughly the size of a human body. I didn't want to think about why they needed to replace those particular tiles. Patient rooms 106, 108, and 112 were spaced evenly along the corridor. The doors were heavy, institutional things with small windows reinforced with wire mesh. I approached room 106 first, my footsteps echoing despite my attempts to walk quietly. Following Rule 3, I knocked gently and announced myself. This is Jordan, night shift nurse. I'm coming in for a routine check. The door swung open with a slight creak. Inside, an elderly man lay motionless in the hospital bed, his breathing deep and regular with the distinctive rhythm of heavy sedation. The room was sparse. The bed, a nightstand, a single chair, and medical equipment monitoring his vitals. Everything beeped and hummed normally. His chart identified him as Raymond Dupree, age 78, admitted for long-term observation. No diagnosis listed, no treatment plan, just those two cryptic words. I checked his vitals. Heart rate steady at 62, blood pressure good, oxygen saturation at 98%. Everything normal. I documented the readings and prepared to leave, then remembered Rule 1. Never turn your back on empty beds. But this bed wasn't empty. Raymond was right there, sleeping peacefully. The rule didn't apply, did it? I turned toward the door, and the temperature in the room dropped so suddenly that my breath misted in front of my face. Every hair on my body stood up. Slowly, fighting every instinct that screamed at me to run, I turned back around. Raymond was exactly where he'd been, unchanged. But now I could see what I'd missed before. There was a second bed in the room, a gurney pushed against the far wall, partially hidden behind a privacy curtain I hadn't noticed. And I turned my back on it. The gurney was empty, its white sheets pristine and undisturbed. But as I stared at it, unable to look away, the mattress compressed slightly, as if someone had just sat down. The depression deepened, moved, shifted to the side. Someone invisible was adjusting their position on that gurney, making themselves comfortable. My heart hammered against my ribs. The pamphlet had said Vincent Theroux appeared when you turned your back. It hadn't mentioned what happened when you caught him in the act of manifesting. For several seconds that felt like hours, I stood frozen, watching the empty gurney bear weight that shouldn't be there. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the mattress sprang back to its normal shape. The temperature returned to normal. Whatever had been there was gone. I backed out of the room, keeping both beds in sight until I was through the door. My hands shook as I closed it. One room down, I whispered to myself, 6 hours to go. You can do this. Room 108 was similar. Another sedated patient, a woman named Catherine Mills, age 64, same vague admission notes. No secondary bed, no unusual cold spots. I completed my check quickly, constantly scanning for anything out of place. Room 112 housed the youngest patient, a man in his 40s named Thomas Bridgewater. He looked worse than the others, his face gaunt and covered in a sheen of sweat despite the cool room. His vitals were lower but stable. Something about his closed eyes bothered me, a feeling that he wasn't quite as deeply asleep as he should be, that he might be aware of my presence. I hurried through the check and left. Back at the nurse's station, I documented everything, including the incident with the gurney in room 106. The logbook was filled with similar entries, hundreds of pages of unexplained occurrences written in different handwriting. I flipped back through recent entries. 11/12, 2:17 a.m. Heard footsteps in sealed east wing. Did not investigate. Rachel, 11/15, 1:43 a.m. Room 304, light flickered 3 times. Followed protocol. Lost 4 hours. Do not remember what happened. Vincent K. 11/19, 3:47 a.m. Patient 108 spoke in her sleep. Said they're already here. She's been unconscious for 3 months. DM, that last entry was from just 5 days ago. These weren't ancient ghost stories. This was happening regularly to every person who worked here. I was about to close the logbook when I noticed something odd. Several pages had been torn out, leaving jagged edges in the binding. The missing pages corresponded to dates in October, roughly 6 weeks ago. Someone had removed an entire week's worth of documentation. Why? What had happened that was worse than everything else recorded here? A sound pulled me from my thoughts. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from somewhere down the corridor. I grabbed the pamphlet, frantically scanning for the relevant rule. There it was, Rule 8. If you hear footsteps when no one else should be present, identify the direction and rhythm. Slow, deliberate steps indicate a residual haunting. Safe to ignore. Running footsteps require immediate action per Protocol 8B. These were slow, deliberate, coming closer. I forced myself to stay calm, to breathe. Residual haunting meant it was just a replay, an echo of something that had happened before. Not dangerous, just unnerving as hell. The footsteps grew louder, passing right by the nurse's station. I couldn't see anyone, but I could hear them clearly. The squeak of shoes on linoleum, the slight drag of one foot, the rhythm of someone walking with purpose. They continued down the hallway and faded into silence. Just an echo, I muttered. Just a recording playing back. Nothing that can hurt you. But my hands were still shaking when I poured myself coffee from the pot Patricia had left. I checked the mug carefully. White, plain, with a small chip on the handle. Safe, according to the rules. The coffee was bitter and strong, and I drank it gratefully, needing the warmth and the jolt of caffeine. 1:47 a.m. Time for the second round of checks. I gathered my supplies and headed back down the corridor. The fluorescent lights flickered as I walked, just for a moment, but enough to make my steps falter. Rule 7. Light flickering is normal in older buildings. However, if lights flicker in a pattern, 3 quick flashes followed by darkness. Evacuate the floor immediately. This wasn't a pattern. Just old wiring. Probably. I completed checks on all 3 patients without incident, though I swore Thomas Bridgewater's position had changed slightly. His head was turned more toward the door now, as if he'd been listening for my approach. But his vitals showed he was still deeply sedated. Just my imagination, heightened by fear and too much caffeine. Back at the nurse's station, I found myself staring down the length of the corridor toward the area I'd been told to avoid. The sealed east wing. The old hospital. From here, I could see the door that separated the active wing from the abandoned sections. It was industrial, reinforced, with multiple deadbolts and a sign that read, "Authorized personnel only. Structural hazard." But someone had spray painted over it in red. "Keep out. We mean it." As I stared, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. One of the deadbolts was undone. Just one, the middle bolt, hanging loose from its housing. The door wasn't open, but it wasn't fully secured either. I grabbed the pamphlet, looking for the relevant rule. Rule 16. If you discover any door to the sealed sections unsecured, do not attempt to investigate or secure it yourself. Contact emergency services immediately and retreat to the nurse's station. My hand hovered over the phone. But what would I say? That a bolt was loose. That seemed like an overreaction. Maybe Patricia had left it that way intentionally. Maybe it was a test to see if I'd follow the rules or use common sense. $3,000 was on the line. I didn't want to look paranoid or incompetent on my first night. I compromised with myself. I'd approach the door, just close enough to secure the bolt, and retreat immediately. Quick, simple, problem solved. I didn't have to go through the door or even look beyond it. Just flip the bolt back into place. The walk down that corridor felt longer than it should have been. The fluorescent light seemed dimmer here, and I could hear sounds from beyond the sealed door. The groan of old pipes, the creak of settling wood, and something else. Something that might have been wind whistling through broken windows, or might have been whispering voices, too low and tangled to make out individual words. I reached for the bolt. My fingers were inches away when I heard it. A child's laughter, high and bright and completely wrong in this place. It came from the other side of the door, from somewhere deep in the abandoned wing, clear as day, unmistakable, the sound of a child playing. Every rule I'd read suddenly made perfect sense. The desperate handwriting, the crossed-out sections, the missing pages from the logbook. This place wasn't just haunted by echoes and shadows. There was something active here, something that played with the living, something that had learned the patterns of the staff and knew exactly how to lure them into making fatal mistakes. My hand snapped back as if the bolt were electrified. I backed away from the door, nearly tripping over my own feet in my haste. The child's laughter followed me, growing louder, more insistent, joined now by the sound of small hands slapping against the other side of the door. Slap, 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 moving down the length of the door. Too many hands for one child. A dozen small palms pounding in rhythm. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran back to the nurse's station, my heart pounding, the silver bell jangling against my hip. The sounds cut off abruptly the moment I crossed some invisible threshold, leaving me gasping and shaking in the fluorescent safety of the nurse's station. I grabbed the phone and dialed the emergency number. It rang 6 times before Patricia's gravelly voice answered. "Jordan? The east wing door?" I gasped. "One of the bolts is undone. There's something. I heard children." "Did you touch the door?" "No, I almost did, but—" "Good." Relief flooded her voice. "Very good. Listen carefully. That bolt comes loose every few nights. It's not your responsibility to secure it. In fact, attempting to secure it is exactly what it wants you to do. The moment you touch that door, you've accepted an invitation. Do you understand? Never touch that door. Not to open it, not to secure it, not even to check if it's locked. What's in there?" My voice came out as a whisper. The remnants of the old psychiatric ward. It was shut down in 1983 after the incident. 47 patients and 3 staff members died in a single night. Fire, officially. But there was no smoke damage, Jordan. No burns. They just died. All of them, between 2:45 and 3:15 a.m. The devil's hour. The window when I was supposed to stay in the nurse's station with all lights on. Some of them were children. I asked, though I already knew the answer. The youngest was 6. The oldest was 14. Psychiatric disorders weren't well understood back then. They were institutionalized for things we barely consider problems today. Trauma, anxiety, behavioral issues. They died scared and confused, and they never left. Every few years, someone touches that door. Every few years, we lose a staff member. Don't be one of them. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there, staring at the phone, trying to process what I just learned. 47 dead patients, children among them, all dying in a 30-minute window for no apparent reason. And their spirits were still here, still playing their games, still trying to lure the living into joining them. I checked my watch. 2:31 a.m. 14 minutes until the devil's hour began. I made sure every light in the nurse's station was on, pulled my chair to the center of the desk area where I could see in all directions, and waited. The corridor seemed to grow darker as 2:45 approached, as if the shadows were pressing against the pools of fluorescent light. The temperature dropped degree by degree. My breath started to mist. The ancient radiators went silent, their hissing and clanking stopping mid-cycle. And in that sudden quiet, I heard them, whispers, dozens of them, overlapping and incomprehensible, coming from every direction at once. The clock on the wall ticked over to 2:45 a.m. Every light in the corridor went out simultaneously, leaving only the lights directly over the nurse's station. I was in a circle of brightness surrounded by absolute darkness. The whispers grew louder, closer, forming words now. "Help us. Please help us. It hurts. Make it stop. Why won't you help us?" Shapes moved in the darkness. Small shapes, child-sized, darting between pools of shadow. I could see them in my peripheral vision, but when I tried to look directly at them, they vanished. They were circling the nurse's station, testing the boundaries of the light, looking for weaknesses. A face appeared at the edge of the darkness, pale and gaunt, with eyes that were too large and too dark. A girl, maybe 10 years old, in a faded hospital gown. She reached one skeletal hand toward me, her mouth moving in silent pleading. I gripped the edge of the desk, fighting every instinct that screamed at me to help her to reach back. Rule 15. Do not respond to any requests for help during this window, regardless of how urgent they sound. I'm sorry, I whispered. I can't. I'm so sorry. The girl's face twisted, her expression changing from pleading to rage in an instant. She opened her mouth impossibly wide and screamed, though no sound came out. Other faces appeared beside her, boys and girls, teenagers and children, all of them dead, all of them furious that I wouldn't save them from a horror that had ended 40 years ago. They surged toward the light. I squeezed my eyes shut, my hand instinctively finding the silver bell. But something made me stop before ringing it. The pamphlet had said to ring it 3 times if things became overwhelming. But it was only 2:47 a.m. I had 28 minutes left. If I called for help now, would Patricia think I was too weak for this? Would I lose the job and the money I desperately needed? I forced my eyes open. The spirits were at the very edge of the light now, pressing against some invisible barrier, their mouths open in silent screams, their hands clawing at the air inches from my face. But they couldn't cross. The light held them back. 28 minutes, I said out loud, my voice shaking but firm. You've got 28 minutes, and then you have to go back. I can wait that long. The spirits didn't respond with anything I could hear, but their fury was palpable. They circled and raged, and I sat in my chair, gripping the desk, counting down the seconds until 3:15 a.m. It was going to be a very long half hour. Time moved differently during the devil's hour. Each second stretched and warped like taffy, pulling itself thin before snapping forward in sudden lurches. I kept my eyes fixed on the clock. 2:53 a.m., watching the second hand tick with agonizing slowness while the dead children circled just beyond my sphere of light. They'd stopped trying to breach the barrier. Instead, they changed tactics. Now they simply stood there, staring, their 2 large eyes unblinking, their faces shifting between expressions of sorrow and malevolence. Watching them was like looking at a photograph negative. Something fundamentally wrong with the way the shadows fell across their features, the way their mouths moved without making sound, the way they stood perfectly still without even the pretense of breathing. At 2:58 a.m., they began to sing. It started as a low hum, barely audible, rising from the darkness like fog. Then words emerged, the melody of a lullaby I didn't recognize, but somehow knew was old. Older than this building, older than the trauma that had trapped these children here. Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Mama's going to buy you a mockingbird. And if that mockingbird don't sing, Mama's going to cut off your. The lyrics twisted, became wrong, became threats disguised as comfort. The children's voices rose in pitch and volume until they were shrieking the perverted lullaby, and I realized with horror that they were singing in perfect harmony despite their apparent rage. They'd done this before, many times. This was a performance they'd perfected over decades. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound came from inside my head now, vibrating through my skull. The pressure built behind my eyes until tears streamed down my face. Just when I thought my head would split open, the clock struck 3 a.m. and the singing stopped. The children were gone. The corridor lights flickered back on. The temperature normalized. The only evidence of what had just happened was my racing heart and the sweat soaking through my scrubs. 15 minutes left. I could make it 15 more minutes. But the nurse's station suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable. Every shadow seemed deeper now, pregnant with possibility. I found myself spinning in my chair, checking every corner, every doorway, convinced that something was creeping up behind me. The fluorescent lights hummed their eternal song, but underneath that steady drone, I heard other sounds. The drip of water from a faucet that shouldn't be running. The creak of a door opening somewhere distant. And footsteps. Not the slow, deliberate footsteps from earlier, but quick, light steps. Adult steps. Coming from the direction of the patient rooms. Rule 8 covered slow footsteps. I frantically flipped through the pamphlet looking for fast ones. There. Rule 8b. Running footsteps indicate active manifestation. Determine direction and origin. If approaching your location, ring bell immediately and prepare for emergency evacuation. The footsteps weren't running exactly, but they were purposeful, moving with urgency. They came from the direction of room 106, Raymond Dupree's room, where I'd seen the gurney compress under invisible weight. I grabbed the clipboard and my flashlight, checking the time. 3:04 a.m. 11 minutes left in the devil's hour. Should I investigate or wait it out? The rules said stay in the nurse's station during this window, but what if something was actually wrong with one of the patients? What if Raymond was in distress? The footsteps stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard a new sound, a wet, rhythmic scraping, like something being dragged across linoleum. It was coming from the same direction, moving slowly down the corridor toward the nurse's station. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause, scrape. My hand found the silver bell. 3 rings and someone would come. But Patricia had said the bell was for when things got overwhelming. Was this overwhelming? Or was this just part of the job, the reason they paid $3,000 for a single night? I compromised again. Always compromising. Always splitting the difference between following the rules and proving I could handle this. I'd go check on the patients, make sure they were safe, then retreat back to the nurse's station. Quick in and out. The dragging sound was probably just pipes or the building settling. Probably. I stepped out from behind the desk, flashlight in hand, even though the corridor lights were on. The beam cut through the fluorescent glow, somehow providing more psychological comfort than the overhead lights. 3 doors between me and room 106. The dragging sound had stopped, but I could feel eyes on me, tracking my movement. Room 112 first. Thomas Bridgewater. I knocked, announced myself, pushed open the door. Thomas was exactly where I had left him, though his eyes were moving rapidly beneath his closed lids. REM sleep, dreaming, except his vitals showed sedation levels that shouldn't allow for dreams. His heart rate had elevated slightly, 78 beats per minute, up from 65. Everything else normal. I documented the change and moved on. Room 108. Catherine Mills. I knocked, announced, entered. Catherine was. She wasn't in her bed. My heart stopped. The bed was empty. sheets pulled back, IV line dangling, heart monitor beeping its alarm. But Catherine couldn't have gotten up. She'd been comatose for 3 months according to the logbook. The sedation alone should have kept her immobile. Yet her bed was empty. I spun around, scanning the room. The bathroom door was closed. She had to be in there, somehow conscious, somehow mobile. I approached the bathroom, calling out, "Catherine? Mrs. Mills? I'm coming in to help you." My hand touched the bathroom door handle. It was ice cold, so cold that frost had formed on the metal. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, to back away, to run. Instead, I turned the handle and pushed the door open. The bathroom was empty, but written in the condensation on the mirror, in shaky, desperate letters, were 2 words: "Help him." Behind me, the heart monitor's alarm suddenly went silent. I whirled around to find Catherine back in her bed, exactly as she'd been when I'd last checked on her. Sheets pulled up to her chin, IV line intact, as if she'd never moved. Her vitals were normal. Everything was normal, except for the message on the mirror and the fact that my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the clipboard. I documented everything with hands that refused to stay steady. 3:07 a.m. Patient in 108 appeared to be missing. Found bathroom empty with message on mirror. Patient returned to bed. No explanation. Unable to determine if hallucination or a genuine event. 2 more minutes until 3:15. 2 more minutes until the devil's hour ended, and I could breathe again. I should have retreated to the nurse's station, should have waited out the remaining time in relative safety. But that message, "Help him," echoed in my mind. Him, not her. Him in 106, or Thomas in 112. I chose 106, driven by some instinct I couldn't name. I knocked, announced myself, pushed open the door. Raymond Dupre lay in his bed. Vitals steady, the gurney against the wall was empty. No signs of the invisible presence I'd witnessed earlier. Everything appeared normal until I moved closer to check Raymond's IV. His eyes were open. Not just open, wide open, staring directly at me with an intensity that suggested full consciousness despite the sedation levels that should have rendered him nearly unconscious. His mouth moved, working silently, trying to form words. I leaned closer, my training overriding my fear, checking his airway and breathing. "Mr. Dupre." "Raymond? Can you hear me?" His mouth continued moving. I leaned closer, still, close enough that I could hear the faint whisper of air moving across his vocal cords. He was saying something, the same words over and over. "Vincent's behind you. Vincent's behind you. Vincent's behind you." The temperature plummeted. Ice crystals formed on the inside of the window. My breath became white clouds. And I remembered with sudden, horrifying clarity, that I turned my back on the empty gurney when I'd approached Raymond's bed. Rule 1. Never turn your back on empty beds, gurneys, or examination tables. Every hair on my body stood up. The feeling of being watched intensified until it was almost physical, a pressure between my shoulder blades like fingertips pressed against my spine. Something was standing right behind me, close enough that I should be able to feel its breath if it breathed. Close enough to touch. Raymond's eyes, lucid despite the drugs flooding his system, held mine. He gave the tiniest shake of his head. Don't turn around. Don't look. But I had to move. I couldn't stand here forever, frozen in place. I had to get out of this room. Slowly, fighting every trembling muscle, I began to step backward toward the door, keeping my eyes on Raymond, maintaining the illusion that I hadn't broken the rule, that I hadn't left myself vulnerable. The presence followed. I could feel it matching my movements, staying just behind me, just outside my peripheral vision. The cold intensified with each step. My lungs burned from the frigid air. 3 more steps to the door. 2, 1. My hand found the door frame. I pulled myself through the threshold and finally, turned around. The gurney was occupied now. A man sat on it, dressed in a hospital gown from another era, his face gaunt and pale, his eyes black holes in his skull. Vincent Theroux. He sat perfectly still, hands folded in his lap, head tilted at an angle that would have been quizzical if not for the wrongness of everything else about him. We stared at each other for a moment that stretched into eternity. Then Vincent smiled, and his teeth were too white, too many, filling his mouth in impossible rows. I slammed the door. My watch read 3:15 a.m. The devil's hour was over. I stood in the corridor, gasping, my back against the wall, trying to process what had just happened. Raymond's eyes had been open and aware. He'd warned me. How? The sedation should have rendered him incapable of consciousness, let alone speech. And Vincent. I'd seen Vincent Theroux, seen him as clearly as I'd ever seen anything, solid and real and utterly impossible. The corridor lights seemed brighter now, more stable. The oppressive weight that had filled the air during the past 30 minutes had lifted. I could breathe again without feeling like I was inhaling something toxic. The devil's hour had ended, and with it, the worst of the night's horrors. Or so I thought. I returned to the nurse's station on legs that barely supported me, collapsing into the chair and documenting everything that had happened. The logbook entry took 3 pages. My handwriting devolved into barely legible scrawls as I tried to capture every detail. Catherine's disappearance and return, the message on the mirror, Raymond's impossible consciousness, Vincent's manifestation. When I finished, I flipped back through previous entries, looking for similar experiences. I found them everywhere. Different handwriting, different dates, but the same pattern. Patients appearing and disappearing, messages from nowhere. Vincent stalking anyone who broke Rule 1. And scattered throughout were references to room 304, always oblique, always fearful. The light in 304 must stay on. The light in 304 is flickering. Followed protocol. Lost time near 304. Heard screaming from 304. Did not. From the nurse's station, I couldn't see room 304's door, but I knew it was there around a corner in a section of the building that still functioned but felt abandoned. Patricia had said the light kept something contained, that it should stay in the dark. They said if the light goes out, it comes out. What was it? What had happened in 1983 that created something worth containing? The psychiatric ward fire had killed 47 people, but Patricia had implied room 304's entity was different, separate, more dangerous than the restless dead children. As if, summoned by my thoughts, the lights in the corridor flickered. Not the three-flash pattern that meant evacuation. Just a single, long flicker that plunged everything into darkness for a full 2 seconds before the fluorescence hummed back to life. In those 2 seconds of darkness, I heard it, a sound like nails on a chalkboard, except the chalkboard was the inside of a door, and the nails belonged to something desperate to get out. The sound came from the direction of room 304. Then light returned, and the sound stopped. I checked my watch. 3:47 a.m. Just over 2 hours until sunrise, until my shift ended, until I could walk out of this nightmare and never come back. 2 hours. I could survive 2 hours. People survived worse things. Combat veterans survived firefights. Disaster victims survived earthquakes and flood. I could survive 2 hours in a haunted hospital. The phone at the nurse's station rang. The sound was so unexpected, so jarringly normal, that I actually jumped. Who would be calling at 3:47 in the morning? Patricia checking on me. Emergency services. I picked up the receiver. Nurse's station, this is Jordan. Static. Heavy, thick static that rose and fell like breathing. Underneath it, I could hear something else. A voice, maybe, or multiple voices speaking in a rhythm that almost formed words but never quite resolved into language. The sound made my teeth ache and my vision blur. I hung up. The phone rang again immediately. I didn't answer. It rang 17 times before falling silent. The moment it stopped, I heard footsteps again. Not the slow, deliberate footsteps of a residual haunting. Not the quick, purposeful steps I'd heard earlier. These were running footsteps, fast and panicked, coming from deep in the building, from the direction of the sealed east wing. Running toward me. Rule 8b, running footsteps indicate active manifestation. Ring bell immediately and prepare for emergency evacuation. My hand closed around the silver bell. I rang it once, twice, 3 times. The clear sound cut through the hospital's oppressive atmosphere like a knife. I set the bell down and waited, listening to those running footsteps grow closer, closer, accompanied now by ragged breathing and what might have been sobbing. They were almost at the nurse's station when they stopped. Abruptly, mid-step, the sobbing cut off. Silence crashed down like a physical weight. Then a woman's voice, clear and close, whispered directly into my ear despite no one being there. Room 304's light is out. I spun in my chair, searching for the source of the voice. Nothing. No one. But when I looked down the corridor, past the patient rooms, around the corner toward the section I'd been avoiding all night, I saw what I'd been dreading: darkness. Complete darkness where light should be. Room 304's eternal light had gone out. The silver bell's echo faded into silence, but Patricia didn't arrive. I waited, counting seconds that stretched like hours, my eyes fixed on that patch of absolute darkness where room 304's light should have been glowing. The emergency protocol said to stay in the nurse's station, call the number, and wait for relief. Don't investigate. Don't approach. Don't do anything except sit tight and survive until someone else arrived to handle it. I grabbed the phone and dialed the emergency number. It rang and rang and rang 12 times before switching to voicemail. You've reached Patricia Landry. I'm unable to take your call. Leave a message after the tone. Patricia, it's Jordan. Room 304's light is out. I've rung the bell. I'm following protocol and staying at the nurse's station. Please call back immediately. I hung up and tried again. Same result. I tried a third time, my hand shaking so badly I could barely press the numbers. Voicemail again. She wasn't coming, or couldn't come, or was already on her way, and the phone wasn't reaching her. I was alone with whatever had been contained in room 304, whatever had been kept in the dark by a single fluorescent bulb for God knew how many years. The darkness around that corner seemed to pulse, to breathe, expanding incrementally with each passing second. The temperature throughout the entire wing had dropped, my breath now misting in front of me, even here at the nurse's station. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered again. Not the three-flash evacuation pattern, but erratically, like something was draining the building's power. I pulled out the pamphlet with trembling hands and found the protocol for room 304's light failure. Page 7, just as Patricia had said, Emergency Protocol 304B, Light Failure Response 1. Remain in nurse's station with all available lights on 2. Contact emergency services using provided number 3. Do not investigate the source of any sounds 4. Do not approach room 304 or its adjacent corridor 5. If manifestation occurs outside room 304, implement patient 0 protocol immediately 6. Wait for authorized personnel. Do not leave your post under any circumstances. Patient 0 protocol. I flipped frantically through the pamphlet until I found it, nearly at the end, written in different ink than the other rules, as if it had been added as an afterthought, or an emergency measure they'd hoped would never be necessary. Patient 0 protocol enact only if room 304 entity breaches containment. Recognize breach by temperature drop below 45 degrees Fahrenheit, complete power failure in West Wing, or direct manifestation of patient 0 entity. If breach occurs, 1. Lock all patient room doors from outside using red key 2. Seal the corridor by closing fire doors at both ends 3. Retreat to supply closet 2B, not 2A. See Rule 12.4. Remain silent and motionless until sunrise or authorized rescue 5. Under no circumstances make eye contact with patient 06. If patient 0 speaks to you, do not respond. Any response constitutes acceptance of its invitation. My blood turned to ice. The entity in room 304 had a name, Patient Zero, and there was a protocol for when, not if, it escaped. A sound pulled my attention back to the darkened corridor. Scraping. The same wet, rhythmic scraping I'd heard earlier, but louder now, more insistent. Something was being dragged across the floor, coming from the direction of room 304, moving slowly but steadily toward the nurse's station. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. With each scrape came a smell. Antiseptic and rot, the stench of a hospital mixed with decay, as if something long dead was being preserved in formaldehyde, but rotting anyway. The odor grew stronger as the scraping grew louder. The thermometer on the wall read 43 degrees Fahrenheit, 2 degrees below the threshold. Patient Zero had breached containment. I grabbed the red key from the ring Patricia had given me and ran to room 112. Thomas Bridgewater was awake. Not just awake. Sitting upright in bed, his sedation-dimmed eyes tracking my movement with unnatural precision. His mouth hung open, and the voice that emerged wasn't his own. Too deep, too resonant, echoing as if spoken in a cathedral. You should have left when you had the chance. Now you're part of the count. Mr. Bridgewater, I need you to stay calm. Thomas isn't here anymore. Thomas went away when the light went out. They all go away when patient Zero comes. That's the rule. That's how it feeds. I backed toward the door, key in hand. Thomas, or whatever was speaking through Thomas, smiled, revealing teeth that were too white, too perfect, just like Vincent's had been. Lock the door if you want. Lock all the doors. It won't matter. Patient Zero doesn't need doors. Patient Zero is already here, has been here since you signed the waiver. You invited it the moment you put pen to paper. I slammed the door and locked it from the outside, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped the key. Thomas's laughter followed me, muffled but clear. Lock them in. Lock yourself out. It makes no difference. We're all in the same building, all in the same trap. Room 108. Catherine Mills was also sitting up, IV torn from her arm, blood running down her wrist. Her eyes were milky white, rolled back in her head, but she turned to face me as I entered, tracking my movement despite being unable to see. Help him, she said in a voice that wasn't hers, higher and younger, a child's voice. Help him, help him, help him. That's what you said you'd do. That's what you all say. But you never help. You just lock doors and follow rules and wait for sunrise while we scream and scream and scream. Catherine, please. My name is Melissa. I was 9 years old when I died in the fire that wasn't a fire. Patient Zero took me first because I was scared, and fear makes the feast sweeter. It's been feeding for 40 years. 40 years of night shift workers. 40 years of locked doors and broken protocols. You're just the latest meal. I locked her door and ran to room 106. Raymond was awake too, but unlike the others, his eyes held something that looked like genuine consciousness, genuine fear. He grabbed my wrist as I approached, his grip surprisingly strong for someone who'd been sedated. "Run," he whispered, his voice his own. "Whatever else you do, run. Patient zero doesn't just kill you, it makes you part of it. Every person it's taken, every patient who died in that ward, they're all still conscious inside it, screaming forever. I can hear them in my dreams. That's why they keep us sedated, so we can't hear the screaming. But when the light goes out, the sedation doesn't work anymore. We can all hear them, and soon we'll join them. I'm locking the doors to keep it out. It's not to keep it out." Raymond's grip tightened. "It's to keep us in. We're the bait, don't you understand? The three of us, we're patient zero's anchors. As long as we're alive and in this building, it can't leave. But if we die, if it fully consumes us, it breaks free. That's why there are always 3 patients, always sedated, always kept barely alive. We're a prison, and you're the warden, and the locks are meant to keep the inmates from escaping, even if it means we die with the thing we're imprisoning." I stepped back, horror washing over me in waves. "How long have you been here?" 6 months. The man before me lasted 11 months before he stopped fighting the sedation, stopped trying to stay conscious. They said he died of heart failure, but I heard him screaming in my dreams before he went. Patient zero took him during a night shift when the light failed, just like this. They brought me in the next day. The scraping sound was closer now, just around the corner, almost at the patient room corridor. With it came a new sound, breathing, wet and labored, like lungs filled with fluid struggling to draw air. I locked Raymond's door and ran back toward the nurse's station. The fire doors. I had to seal the fire doors at both ends of the corridor. But as I reached for the first one, I realized the problem. Sealing the fire doors would trap me in this corridor with the patients, with whatever was coming. The supply closet mentioned in the protocol was on this side of the fire doors. I'd be locked in with patient zero, unless I sealed the doors from the other side and abandoned the patients. The choice paralyzed me for a moment. 3 people who were here unwillingly, kept sedated and used as living restraints for a malevolent entity. If I followed protocol, I'd be leaving them to die. If I didn't, patient zero might breach into other parts of the hospital, might escape entirely. Raymond's words echoed in my mind. We're a prison. The locks are meant to keep the inmates from escaping. A shadow fell across the far end of the corridor. Something tall. Impossibly tall. Its head nearly touching the 9-foot ceiling. Stepped around the corner from the direction of room 304. The scraping sound came from its movement, from the way it dragged something behind it. In the flickering fluorescent light, I caught glimpses. A hospital gown stained with decades of fluids, arms too long with too many joints, a head that hung at an angle that suggested a broken neck, and a face. I looked away before my mind could fully process what I'd seen. Rule 5 of Patient Zero Protocol: under no circumstances make eye contact. But I'd seen enough. Enough to know that this thing had once been human, had once been a patient in that psychiatric ward, had once been someone's child or sibling or parent. Now it was something else, something that had survived the fire that killed 47 people, something that had been feeding on fear and death for 4 decades. It moved toward me with that horrible, scraping gait, dragging what I now realized was its own twisted leg, the bone broken and healed wrong, the foot turned backward. Each step left a wet trail on the linoleum. I grabbed the fire door and pulled. It swung closed with a heavy metallic clang, sealing mechanisms engaging automatically. I ran to the other end of the corridor and sealed that door too. The patients were locked in. Patient Zero was locked in. And I was locked in with all of them. The supply closet. Closet 2B, not 2A. I found it halfway down the corridor between rooms 108 and 112. The door was unmarked except for a small 2B etched into the metal. I wrenched it open and threw myself inside, pulling the door shut behind me. The closet was small, maybe 4 feet by 6 feet, lined with metal shelves containing medical supplies. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, providing weak yellow light. There was barely enough room to stand. I pressed myself against the back wall, trying to control my breathing, trying not to make a sound. Through the thin door, I heard Patient Zero's approach. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Pause. It was checking the rooms, methodically working its way down the corridor. I heard the door to room 112 rattle, heard Thomas's voice cry out, "No! No, please. I'm still here. I'm still conscious. Don't take me yet." His screaming cut off abruptly, replaced by a wet, tearing sound that I tried desperately not to imagine. Then silence. Then the scraping resumed, moving to the next door. Room 108. Catherine's voice, or the child speaking through her. "It hurts. It hurts. And it never stops hurting. Please, please make it stop." The same wet, tearing sound. The same abrupt silence. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Pause. Room 106. Raymond did dime. Sorry this place exists. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The sound this time was different. Longer. More violent. Something crashed against the wall. Glass shattered. Then, finally, silence. The scraping stopped. For a long moment, nothing. No sound at all, except my own heartbeat thundering in my ears and my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I couldn't control despite the protocol's warning to remain silent and motionless. Then patient zero spoke. Its voice came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating through the walls, the floor, the very air itself. Deep and hollow, like words spoken from the bottom of a well, each syllable carrying weight that pressed against my chest and made breathing difficult. Little warden, little keeper, little volunteer who signed the papers and walked through the door. I can smell your fear. It's delicious. It's been so long since I had someone new. The same three over and but you're fresh. You're ripe. You're perfect. I clamped my hand over my mouth to keep from whimpering. Stay silent. Don't respond. Any response constitutes acceptance of its invitation. I know you're in the closet. I can hear your heart beating like a drum. Boom, boom, boom. You think a door will stop me? The scraping resumed right outside the closet. I could see shadows moving in the gap under the door, blocking out the corridor light. Something touched the door handle. The metal grew cold under whatever was grasping it. But I'll give you a choice. That's more than they gave me. More than they gave any of us. Open this door and look at me. Really look at me. See what they made me. See what 40 years of containment does to a soul. And if you can look at me without screaming, without looking away, I'll let you live. I'll go back to my room. I'll wait for them to fix the light. I'll be patient. That's what patient zero means. The first to wait. The eternal wait. The suffering that never ends. The door handle turned slowly. The lock held, but I could hear metal straining. Or you can hide until sunrise. Stay in your little closet. Stay silent. Stay still. And when morning comes, you can walk out. You can collect your $3,000. You can leave, but you'll carry me with you. You'll see me in every shadow. You'll hear my scraping in every quiet moment. You'll know that you survived by letting 3 people die. You'll know that you followed protocol while I fed. That knowledge will rot you from the inside. That's the real curse of this place. Not the ghosts, not the monsters, but the guilt of survival. The handle stopped turning. The presence outside the door withdrew slightly. Patient zero was giving me time to consider, to imagine, to break myself with possibilities before it broke me physically. I squeezed my eyes shut and pressed harder against the back wall. The metal shelves dug into my spine. My legs were cramping from standing so rigidly. Every muscle in my body screamed for movement, for release, for anything except this frozen terror. How long until sunrise? I'd lost track of time. It could be minutes. It could be hours. In this closet, in this darkness, time meant nothing. Tick-tock, little warden. Tick-tock. The night is long, but not infinite. Soon you'll have to choose. Soon you'll have to decide what kind of person you are. The kind who follows rules while people die, or the kind who breaks rules and faces consequences. I bit down on my hand to keep from screaming, tasting blood where my teeth broke skin. Stay silent. Stay still. Wait for sunrise. That was the protocol. That was the only way to survive. But Raymond's face flashed through my mind. Thomas's, Catherine's, 3 people who'd been imprisoned here, kept barely alive as anchors for a monster, and I'd locked them in with it. I had followed protocol. I'd done exactly what I was supposed to do. And they died screaming. The guilt was already starting, just as patient 0 had promised. A weight settling into my chest, heavy and cold, that I knew would never fully lift. Outside the door, patient 0 began to laugh. Not the maniacal laughter of madness, but something worse. The sad, knowing laughter of something that had won this game too many times to count, that knew exactly how the night would end, that understood human nature better than humans understood themselves. You've already chosen, it said softly. The moment you hesitated was the moment you chose. Now you just have to live with it, if you can. The scraping receded down the corridor. Patient 0 was returning to room 304, satisfied with its meal, content to wait for the light to be restored and the next cycle to begin. I stood in that closet, shaking and bleeding and breathing, and I waited for sunrise. Time became meaningless in that supply closet. I stood pressed against the shelves, my body locked in rigid terror, unable to move even after patient 0's scraping footsteps had faded back toward room 304. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sounds had been. A heavy, expectant silence that felt like the building itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do next. My phone said 4:23 a.m., 1 hour and 37 minutes until my shift officially ended. 1 hour and 37 minutes until sunrise broke over the Louisiana bayou and released me from this nightmare. But those numbers felt abstract, disconnected from reality. Time in Crescent Heights didn't follow normal rules. I'd killed them. Not directly, not with my own hands, but I'd locked those doors knowing what would happen. Raymond had tried to warn me, had tried to explain what they were, why they were here. And I'd sealed him in anyway because the protocol said to. Because following rules was easier than making impossible choices. Because I'd convinced myself that $3,000 was worth being the kind of person who could do that. The guilt patient 0 had promised was already eating me alive. Around 4:45 a.m., I heard sounds from the direction of room 304. Not scraping this time, but something mechanical. Clicks and hums and the flicker of electricity being restored. The lights in the corridor, which had been dimmed and erratic, suddenly stabilized. Through the gap under the closet door, I could see the hallway brightening incrementally. Someone was fixing the light. Someone had come. I waited another 10 minutes, paranoid that this was a trick, that patient zero could manipulate electricity and was luring me out. But the sounds continued. Footsteps, human footsteps, along with the clink of tools and the low murmur of voices. Multiple people. Real, living people. At 4:58 a.m., I finally opened the closet door. The corridor was empty. The lights were on, bright and steady, banishing the shadows that had filled every corner during the night. The wet trails patient zero had left were gone, the floor spotless as if it had been recently mopped. The air temperature had returned to normal. Everything looked clean and ordinary and completely benign, except for the doors to rooms 106, 108, and 112. All three stood open. I approached room 112 first, moving on legs that barely supported me, expecting to find carnage. Instead, I found an empty bed with fresh sheets, medical equipment powered down, and no sign that Thomas Bridgewater had ever existed. The room had been completely sanitized, every surface gleaming. Even the smell was wrong. Not the antiseptic and rot combination from earlier, but industrial cleaner with an underlying note of ozone. Room 108 was the same. Empty bed, fresh sheets, no evidence of Catherine Mills or the blood that had run down her arm. Room 106 was identical. No Raymond Dupre, no signs of struggle, nothing except pristine hospital room waiting for its next occupant. They'd erased everything. In less than an hour, someone had come in, removed 3 bodies, cleaned 3 rooms completely, and restored power to room 304. Who could move that efficiently? Who had the authority to make 3 patients disappear without a trace? I walked toward room 304 on numb legs, drawn by morbid curiosity and the need to confirm that the light was actually back on. As I turned the corner, I saw the door. Industrial, reinforced with a small wire mesh window. The light above it was on, bright and steady, its glow spilling out into the corridor. Through the window, I could see into the room itself. It was empty. Just a hospital bed, stripped bare, and medical equipment that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. The walls were padded, the kind of padding used in psychiatric facilities to prevent self-harm. And covering every inch of those padded walls were marks, scratches, gouges, what might have been words carved with fingernails or teeth, layer upon layer of desperate graffiti that spoke of decades of confinement. But no patient zero. The room was empty. The thing that had killed 3 people was nowhere to be seen. Or it was exactly where it had always been. Locked in that room, contained by light, waiting for the next failure, the next feeding. You survived. I spun around. Patricia stood behind me, dressed in the same navy scrubs from earlier, looking tired but unsurprised. She held a clipboard and wore an expression that was equal parts relieved and resigned. The patients, I started, are being transferred to another facility. Patricia cut me off smoothly. Their families were notified. The paperwork is being processed. You don't need to worry about them. They died. I heard them die. Patient 0 is contained. The light is back on. The situation is resolved. Her pale blue eyes bore into mine with an intensity that made it clear this wasn't a conversation. It was an instruction. What happened tonight is covered by the confidentiality agreement you signed. You experienced a traumatic evening, equipment malfunctions, possible hallucinations brought on by stress, and the building's oppressive atmosphere. But nothing that can be confirmed. Nothing that can be reported. Nothing that would hold up under scrutiny. You can't be serious. 3 people are dead. 3 people whose families will receive substantial compensation and whose medical needs were always terminal. Patricia's voice remained steady, clinical. Raymond Dupre had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Catherine Mills had been in a vegetative state for 3 years with no hope of recovery. Thomas Bridgewater had end-stage ALS. They were all dying. Their presence here gave their deaths meaning. They kept something contained that would have done far worse damage if released. The casual cruelty of it staggered me. They were people. They were conscious. Raymond knew exactly what was happening to him, and he volunteered. They all did. They signed the same waivers you signed, accepted the same compensation their families desperately needed, and served a purpose that mattered. You think this is the first time? We've been running this protocol for 11 years, since the hospital reopened. 33 anchor patients before these 3. 33 terminal cases who chose to die here instead of in hospice, who chose to make their deaths count for something. It's not pretty, but it works. Patient 0 feeds just enough to be satisfied. The light keeps it contained. The cycle continues. I felt sick. And the night shift workers. How many of us have there been? Patricia consulted her clipboard. You're the 47th. Most make it through the night. Some quit immediately after. A few, like Rachel and Diana, lasted several months before the psychological toll became too much. Vincent K., who you might have noticed in the logbook, is still with us. He works days now, maintenance mostly. He can't do nights anymore after what he experienced, but he understands the necessity of what we do here. This is insane. You're feeding people to a monster and calling it a job. We're preventing something infinitely worse. For the first time, Patricia's clinical mask cracked, showing genuine emotion underneath. Fear, old and deep. I was here in 1983. I was a student nurse, 23 years old, working the night shift when it happened. I saw what patient 0 did when it wasn't contained, when we didn't understand what it was or how to control it. 47 people died in 30 minutes, Jordan. 47 people torn apart or driven mad or simply stopped existing. The fire story is a convenient lie. The truth is that patient 0 manifested fully, broke containment, and consumed everything it could reach before we managed to trap it in room 304. It took 12 people working together, 3 of whom didn't survive the effort. We learned that light keeps it dormant, that terminal patients can anchor it, that following strict protocols can maintain the containment indefinitely. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. You want to know the real horror? Patient Zero isn't unique. There are places like this all over the country. Facilities that maintain containment on things that should have died but didn't. Entities that were created through suffering and trauma and neglect. We're not monsters for running this program. We're the last line of defense against something far worse getting out. So yes, 3 people died tonight. And in a few days, 3 more terminal volunteers will take their places. And someone will work the night shift and follow the protocols. And patient Zero will stay contained. Because the alternative isn't liberation. It's apocalypse. I wanted to argue, to rage, to report this to authorities. But even as the impulse formed, I realized the futility. Who would believe me? What evidence did I have? The rooms were clean. The patients had disappeared into bureaucratic paperwork, and I'd signed away my right to speak about any of this. Patricia checked her watch. It's 5:47 a.m. Your shift ends in 13 minutes. There's a shower in the staff bathroom if you want to clean up. Your payment will be direct deposited by end of business today. And Jordan, she fixed me with that penetrating stare. We'll need someone for tomorrow night. The position pays $4,000 for returning workers. You've proven you can follow protocols under extreme circumstances. That's rare and valuable. You're offering me another shift? I'm offering you a choice. Walk away. Carry the guilt of what happened here. Wonder if you could have made a difference if you'd stayed. Or come back. Understand that what we do here matters and be part of something larger than yourself. Either way, you'll never forget this place. At least if you come back, you'll have the satisfaction of knowing you're helping contain something truly dangerous. She left me standing there alone in the corridor, staring at room 304's door and its eternal light. The hospital was starting to wake up around me. Distant sounds of activity, the arrival of day shift workers, the gradual transformation from nightmare back to mundane reality. At exactly 6 a.m., the front door unlocked. I walked out into the Louisiana morning, into air that was already thick with humidity and the promise of another scorching day. Spanish moss swayed in a breeze I couldn't feel. My car sat in the parking lot, covered in dew, looking exactly as I'd left it 7 hours earlier. 7 hours. That's all it had been. One shift, one night. Yet I felt like I'd aged years. I sat in my car for a long time, engine running, air conditioning blasting, trying to process everything. My phone buzzed. A notification from my bank. Deposit received $3,000. Blood money. Guilt money. Shut up and forget money. But I wouldn't forget. Couldn't forget. Raymond's voice echoed in my memory. I'm sorry to whoever comes after me. Thomas's laughter. Catherine's child voice pleading for help. The wet, tearing sounds. Patient Zero's philosophical musings about choice and guilt and the cost of survival. I drove home in a daze, showered, tried to sleep. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that impossibly tall figure with too many joints and its backward-turned foot. Every shadow held potential threat. Every sound made me flinch. The day passed in fragments. I tried to research Crescent Heights Medical Center, looking for information about the 1983 incident, about previous staff members, about anything that would confirm or deny what I'd experienced. I found nothing useful. Just sanitized official records, a few conspiracy theory forums that were too outlandish to be credible, and a historical society page that mentioned the building's architecture without discussing its history. I found one thing that made my blood run cold: a memorial page for healthcare workers who died in Louisiana. Buried in the list was Diana Martinez, aged 31, cause of death listed as accidental in 2023. Her photo showed a smiling woman in scrubs. In the comment section, someone had written, "Diana was the bravest person I knew. She stayed at that place longer than anyone thought possible. She tried to change things from the inside. They said it was an accident, but I'll never believe that." Patricia had mentioned Diana. Lost time near 304. One logbook entry had said in different handwriting. What had happened to her? Had she tried to break the cycle? Had she refused to follow protocol? By evening, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. "Jordan? It's Patricia. I wanted to check in. See how you're doing." "I'm fine." The lie came automatically. "Good. I'm glad. Listen, about tomorrow night. I haven't decided. I understand. It's a lot to process. But I want you to know something." She paused, and I heard genuine compassion in her voice for the first time. "What you're feeling right now, that guilt, that horror, that sense that you abandoned people who needed you, that's your humanity speaking. It means you're a good person who found themselves in an impossible situation. But here's what I've learned in 11 years. The guilt of locking those doors is terrible. But the guilt of what happens when those doors stay open is infinitely worse. I've seen both. I've lived both. Trust me when I say that following protocol, as cruel as it seems, is the lesser evil. How do you sleep at night? Poorly. But I sleep knowing that because of what we do, thousands of people in the surrounding parishes are safe from something that would consume them all. That has to be enough. It has to be. After she hung up, I sat in my apartment staring at the wall, wrestling with the decision. Part of me wanted to run, to never think about Crescent Heights again, to pretend that none of it had happened. But another part, the part that had become a nurse to help people, that had chosen this profession because it mattered, couldn't let it go. Raymond, Catherine, and Thomas were dead, but their replacements would be arriving soon. Terminal patients who'd made the same desperate choice, trading their final days for money their families needed. Someone would work that night shift. Someone would lock those doors when the light failed again. Someone would stand in that supply closet and listen to people die. It could be me, knowing what to expect, prepared for the horror. Or it could be someone else, walking in blind like I had, traumatized and broken by the experience. Neither option was good. Both were terrible. But terrible choices were still choices. At 11 p.m., I got in my car and started driving. I told myself I was just going to look to see if I could really go through with returning. But as the miles passed and the familiar landmarks appeared, I knew I was lying to myself. I was going back. The gate to Crescent Heights Medical Center groaned open. The hospital loomed against the night sky, its windows dark except for a few scattered lights in the west wing. And high up, around what I now knew was the corner near room 304, a single light burned bright and steady, keeping something contained that should have died 40 years ago but hadn't. Patricia was waiting at the entrance. She didn't look surprised to see me. $4,000, she said, handing me the familiar brown pamphlet. Same rules, same protocols. 3 new patients arrived this afternoon. All terminal, all volunteers, all aware of what they signed up for. I took the pamphlet. The cover was worn, stained, marked by years of desperate fingers, clutching it like a lifeline. I opened it to the first page and read the words I'd memorized. Rule 1. Never turn your back on empty beds, gurneys, or examination tables. The light in 304. I asked. Has been inspected, reinforced, and backed up with emergency power. Last night's failure was due to sabotage. We found evidence that someone had tampered with the wiring. We've taken measures to ensure it won't happen again. Sabotage? Who would? But I knew. Diana. Or someone like her. Someone who tried to break the cycle, who thought that releasing patient 0 might somehow end its torment, not understanding that its torment was the only thing keeping it from spreading. The night shift isn't just about following protocols, Patricia said quietly. It's about understanding why those protocols exist, why we make these impossible choices, why we sacrifice the few to protect the many. Not everyone can handle that weight. Diana couldn't. But I think you might be different. I signed the time card, initialed the liability waiver, accepted the keys and the silver bell. My shift started at midnight. I had 43 minutes to prepare myself mentally for another 7 hours in hell. Patricia left me at the nurse's station with the same departing words as before. Follow the rules exactly as written. The corridor stretched before me, empty and waiting. The fluorescent lights hummed their eternal song. In the distance, I heard the familiar creak and groan of an old building settling. But underneath those normal sounds, I heard something else. The faint scraping of something dragging a twisted leg, testing the boundaries of its containment, patient and eternal and hungry. I opened the logbook to a fresh page and wrote, Night 2, 12 a.m. Beginning rounds. All lights functional. Patient 0 contained. For now. Part of me wanted to go back, to leave, to choose a normal life free from the horrors of this place. The other part was still screaming. Would always be screaming, would carry this trauma until the day I died. But I was here. The door had locked behind Patricia. The patients in rooms 106, 108, and 112 needed someone to witness their sacrifice, even if that witnessing meant ultimately locking them in with a monster. Someone had to stand guard. Someone had to maintain the protocols. Someone had to ensure that patient 0 stayed contained. Tonight, that someone was me. Tomorrow night, it might be me again. And the night after that. Because Patricia was right about one thing. The guilt of what I'd done was terrible. But the guilt of what would happen if I walked away and left this place unstaffed, unguarded, with protocols unfollowed, would be infinitely worse. I picked up the pamphlet and began my first round, keeping my eyes open for empty beds, listening for footsteps, counting down the hours until sunrise would release me again. But even sunrise was just a temporary reprieve. The night always came back. Patient zero was eternal. And as long as this place existed, as long as the light in room 304 needed to stay on, someone had to work the shift. The Louisiana night pressed against the windows, thick with humidity and secrets. Spanish moss swayed in windless air, and deep in room 304, beyond the light that kept it contained, something ancient and hungry waited for its next feeding, patient as the grave, eternal as suffering. My shift at Crescent Heights Medical Center had begun. Again, some places don't let you leave even when you walk out the door. Some jobs follow you home. Some nights last forever, repeating in your memory until you can't tell the difference between past and present, between the horrors you witnessed and the horrors waiting in the next shift. They're still hiring. They always need someone for the night shift. The pay is good. The protocols are clear. Just remember, never turn your back on an empty bed. And pray the light in room 304 never goes out again.